turn off their cell phones and we'll put them on mute. Ms. Hilliard will offer our invocation.
Let us pray. Most holy and all-wise God, it's again that we come in your presence, dear God. We thank you for this day. We thank you even for yesterday, dear God, the Resurrection Sunday. And we thank you for your darling Son, Jesus the Christ, who paid it all that we may be here today. And we may worship you, a true and living God. We thank you for this beautiful city, dear God, that you have provided for us. Realizing, Father God, that it's only you that can provide. Father God, we ask that you would be with us and lead us in our endeavors tonight, dear God, as we ponder the direction of the city, the business of the city, dear God. And we thank you and we're praising you right now, and we believe in it by faith. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Are there any amendments to the agenda?
I'd like to request an amendment to discuss the VAC and the booting of cars so that I can bring.
I apologize, I'm not hearing.
I would like to make an amendment that we adjust the agenda to discuss VAC and the booting of the cars that's been going on lately, so that I can bring to the council's attention a couple of situations that have happened since our last council meeting.
Okay, any other amendments to the agenda? If not, may I have a motion, I assume? Mr. McLemore?
Yes.
To amend the agenda to include a discussion of VAC?
Yes.
Okay, is there a second?
I'll second.
Motion is a second. All in favor of the motion, any discussion?
Just one statement, so that it will be clear to everyone that that is a treasurer duty and not a city council duty or function.
Well, in response, the city council is the one that granted that authority to the treasurer, and the only ones who would have the authority to remove that or to rescind that would be the council. I don't think, if the treasurer wants to rescind it, she can, but if council were to deem that they wanted to reverse their position, I think the council would have the authority to do that.
I think it would need to be put on a later meeting, since the treasurer's not here to make any presentation or give the other side of the story. Only the one side would be presented.
I was about to say that the treasurer isn't here to give the full detail, and we would need information from her to carry out any business of booting.
Well, with all due respect, to share what has happened in the last 2 weeks, I'm not saying that the treasurer was wrong in her actions at all for her to present a side, but to share with the council what has been presented to me from 2 citizens. So if you don't want to hear it, fine, but I think that, you know, if there was something that I felt as though was worthy of sharing with the council, that they would be open to hear it. I'm not asking for necessarily a decision. I just asked for a motion to discuss it.
And I would say that it would need to, that should be fair if she were here, because there's 2 sides to every story and we would only hear one side. Okay. Any further discussion?
I would agree that if we could just put it off to the next meeting where we can get her here. I would certainly like to hear it, but I think we need to make sure that we hear, like I said, the whole story. As you know, not that.
Okay. Well, I just.
But if we can get it on the agenda for the next meeting.
Well, then I would request that it be put on the agenda, and I'll rescind the motion.
But I have no problem with it, it's just a matter of having
Yes.
both sides presented. Okay.
If I could request that Mr. Williams bring back a history of, how we got to the point of booting, because our collections or the treasurer's collections procedures aren't, the council did not authorize them. So I'd just like to know whether in fact how everything materialized. As a small presentation before we start the conversation.
Well, if,
All right, thank you.
to refresh the vice mayor's mind, memory. No, just to address the statement,
We
that
need to cut the conversation.
Just a minute to say.
Yeah.
to address the statement that you made, I would just like to say that the order, he can bring it back to verify, but I do believe that she presented and asked for permission, we granted it, and then we went to another meeting and we granted her the authority to make those decisions without us.
We'll have that discussion at our next meeting, and we'll put that on the agenda. Okay. Thank you. Next item is minutes of the previous meeting of March the 26th. Are there any correct, and the December 19th meeting, there was a correction that needed to be made to that. Mr. Martin, do you want to address either of those, especially the December 19th?
They were just not adopted, presented to the city council, as I understand it, for final adoption. It was a closed session, and it was a matter of just putting it on the record, the actual minutes.
Okay, so the minutes of the 19th are merely to adopt them, to officially put them into the minutes of our meeting. Are there any corrections or additions to March the 26th? If not, may I have a motion to adopt both sets of minutes? Move to adopt the minutes for December 19th and the minutes for March 26th. Motion's there, second? Second. All in favor of the motion, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
And aye, motion carries. Next item on the agenda is citizens' time, and I don't have any sign-up sheet. It appears that no one has signed up to speak for citizen time. Old and new business, the first item is proclamation, Amnesty Day. Mr. Martin?
I could ask Donald to make comments on that, Mr.
Okay.
Goodwin.
Mayor, Council, City Council members. This is something that we do every year. We have been probably since about 2002, I believe. This is for Amnesty Days that's coming up during our cleanup week. It's actually the week after the Garden Week tour. So we'd ask that you would adopt this. I think most of you are familiar with it. We also use this when we calculate the amount of trash that is picked up. We use that calculation in our grant application for litter control funds. And the proclamation is one of the documents that is needed to support that in our grant application as well.
Okay. And the dates would be from the 23rd through the 27th?
Yes, that would be the Amnesty Days.
Okay.
To make sure that it's their regular pickup days.
Any questions of Donald? If not, may I have a motion to adopt the proclamation for Amnesty Day? Move to adopt the proclamation for Amnesty Days. Motion's there, second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. And aye, motion carries. Next item is Southampton Franklin Transit Development. I understand Mr. Goodwin is making that presentation as well.
This is a follow-up to the previous meeting when the city council discussed this matter. You asked for some additional information that's enclosed for information only tonight with your agenda. But specifically, the council is asked to adopt a resolution which was shared at the last discussion. And before you considered the resolution, you wanted that additional information. And Donald has gathered it, and we'll try to answer any questions about the resolution. As noted in your agenda, the Planning Commission, I don't want to steal all his comments, but the Planning Commission has previously recommended approval with their own resolution, and you have a copy of that as well.
Okay.
Mr. Goodwin?
Donald?
Yes, I will basically be happy to answer any questions you have. You heard the presentation a couple meetings ago concerning this plan. It did get overshadowed somewhat, I think, when they started talking budgetary and funding, which was not part of the presentation at the time. I know there was some couple questions about if we were to implement this plan at whatever point in time, what would be the cost and how it would be associated. But those questions, would be answered at a different time during the budget process. And if we were to include, doing any of the strategies that are outlined in that plan, we do think it's a good plan. There was a lot of people that served on the task force through a broad cross-section of the county and the city, users that use the iRide. We feel like it's a good plan. The Planning Commission has endorsed it, as you see in the resolution you have before you. And that was a unanimous vote. And they ask that you adopt the plan, and furthermore, send it back to the Planning Commission to ask them to include it in their comprehensive plan update process as well. So if you, with that, if you have any questions, I'll be glad to answer those.
And if I could add one comment, as noted, this does not obligate the city council to funding. That would be done as part of the annual budgetary process, but you do know the amounts that currently are being paid. That was shared last time. The other point I would make is this is a valuable service, and for us to participate and continue to receive this service for our citizens and our community, we have to have a plan.
I think during the last time when John Skirvin was here, we talked about cost of services and, looking at the ridership and the number of people and all that kind of stuff. As this plan moves forward, will that also be taken into account to look at the cost effectiveness of it?
Absolutely. If you really get into the nuts and bolts of the plan itself, I know I gave you an executive summary in your packages last meeting, but the plan does address those issues. And also there will be a monitoring and a report. We would like to do it, at least quarterly over the next year or two on the ridership. So that, become a report in your agenda packages, so we can see, if it's increasing, and where are the riders coming from, where they're going. So that was one of the things that the plan brought out, was that, hey, we need to start monitoring this closely and let you know and let the Board of Supervisors in Southampton know to keep up with what's going on, so we can then make a better informed decision on where we want to move forward with that.
I think the general consensus, and the people that did the consulting work for the county and for the city on it, was that if it became more timely and more, it always ran on time, became more efficient, there were lots of people that would write it that are currently not writing it because they don't want to spend that long waiting on it. And that's where some of the things came in, is to not going up into all the way into each apartment building, or going, but having set areas for pickup and drop off, et cetera. So they did a lot of interviewing, a lot of talking all around the city to different folks. And at this point, it's not going to cost anything because we haven't pulled a trigger on anything. Even if we pass it tonight, it's not going to cost anything until the trigger's been pulled.
I have one question.
Yes, sir.
Somebody, when the trigger's pulled, when the trigger's pulled, have an idea how much it's gonna cost? And don't we have,
No,
like,
sir.
didn't they say the last time that it's approximately 25 people be right?
No,
You don't
sir.
know?
I don't recall the conversation.
Well, we do know what our current budget cost is, but before any future obligation, the city council will have a definite number, a definitive number before you would adopt it.
Okay.
Yeah, before we move forward with anything, any funding, additional funding that would go towards this would definitely have to come back to city council, and it would be a plan, on which strategy that we would follow in that plan. As you knew, there's several strategies in the plan, different ways we could go. So there again, it's just a plan. This is where we would like to go if we were to pursue this down the road. So it's just a plan.
Do you think it'd be feasible in the long run?
That's why we're going to do reporting over the next year or two, you know, capturing how many people are riding, if it increases. I mean, obviously, if it slacks off, we definitely are not going to implement this plan. But if it increasingly, you know, starts to increase over the next year or so, then we want to take a more serious look at which strategy we'd want to take, if any at all, and that would be up to City Council.
And if I could footnote that, I think we will know incrementally. I think it will change incrementally. It's not going to happen overnight. And the other factor is the intangibles that we don't control. What's going to happen with fuel costs and alternative transportation? That's going to dictate a lot of the success, I believe, of the growth of this type of service.
The projected cost, according to the last meeting that we had, if you kept it, was $6,350 projected for 2013. That's greatly increased over 2012, and I'm sure fuel cost is one of the things that was taken into consideration. Ridership right now is down, but again, part of the survey that was done would be that if it became more efficient and people knew it would be at such a place at 9 o'clock, it would increase.
If I could be mistaken, but are these results some of the questions that we asked pertaining to a breakdown of financing, salaries, and things of that nature?
Yes,
Yeah,
sir.
yes.
This is what
That's
I
what I
was. This is what I was sent in
That's what I
response
thought.
to your question.
I think
yes,
you
sir.
have a copy of the audit as
Right.
well as the
Um,
salary information and other.
I'm a little foggy on it, but I think that Councilman Burgess brought up what I felt was a good point, that we need to look at cost effective as far as how much is it costing us per citizen with what we're contributing, and why'd it be more economical if we were paying it for the citizens or something of that nature, which spawned us to start talking about how much, you know, we want to know how much people are making and things. And the closest, in looking at this, I jumped over to page 4, and under expenses, it says management in general is over $1 million. But yet, when I looked at the positions, it's titled Senior Services of Southeastern Virginia, and I don't see any of the management positions listed necessarily. I don't know what GF stands for. What's GF?
This is not just for the iRide. What you're looking at is for senior services for all the activities they do.
Okay,
For the
well,
entire
Southeastern Virginia.
okay, well, what I had asked specifically was what was upper management annual pay with this company. And I noticed also, I don't know what it means, but there's a position under the Franklin, employees in Franklin. We have a annual wages for one cook that is $23,000 a year with $4,000 benefits. And we have another cook that is getting $16,000 a year. And I'm trying to understand if these are part-time positions, what is justifying a $23,000 a year salary for a part-time position, and also an additional $4,000 a year benefits, totaling some $27,000 a year for a part-time employee that's a cook.
I cannot answer that question.
Not-
That's really not a part of the.
Not
It's
not
not
all
part of the
positions,
IRA.
not all positions are part-time.
No, I'm talking about the one that says part-time.
Okay.
So, and the only reason I bring this up is because it is a part of the same packet, correct?
No, totally different.
We're talking about the
These are-
iRide presentation, and when I went,
But the employees that they've listed, it says Senior Services of
Right, it says
Southeastern
Senior
Virginia,
Services,
employees in
exactly.
Franklin. They do other services other than iRide services in Franklin.
I understand, but I thought the same organization that was sponsoring the iRide is sponsoring the senior services, perhaps?
They are.
They are,
Right, so it's the same,
it is
Separate
Senior
departments.
Services.
separate departments, but when
Separate activity.
we asked for breakdowns, because it is a private company, and they are asking for some funding.
I didn't understand, so what kind of company?
A private company.
It's not. It's
not
a,
a private
it's a,
It's a
It's a nonprofit organization, Southeastern Senior Services.
There's
Are
seven
they,
of
are
these
they, is this a
organizations.
state organization?
Yes.
Seven of them in
No,
the
they're
state.
funded.
They're funded
By
by
the
the
state.
state. He
But
made
it's-
that clear.
right.
But they're a nonprofit.
Right, it's a nonprofit organization. I'm aware of that.
But they're regulated by the state. rules
I
and
understand.
guidelines.
I understand that. So what I'm saying is this, they get to basically come up with their own structure as far as how they allocate their funds for their upper management.
They have a board of directors
Now,
that
do you-
controls all of that.
The Red Cross is also a nonprofit organization, but their CEOs and people are making $1 million a year.
Mr.
Now-
McMore, let's get back on.
So my point is to explain to me, all I asked is how, first of all, I don't see what I asked for at the last meeting, which was a breakdown of the upper management payroll. Because if we're breaking it down at 24 riders or whatever it is, divided by the cost that we're paying for these riders, is this cost effective to us as we consider funding it into the next year? Yes, I want to provide the rides. I'm the one brought up the fact that we need to expand it to cover the people in Hunterdale. So I certainly support the concept, but without knowing exactly the structure and how the monies are being allocated, we don't know if we're funding something that really doesn't need our funds to provide the service because the federal government and the state is providing them funds to do it.
Mr. Mayor.
Well, we said at the beginning, we're not funding anything tonight.
I didn't say we were funding it tonight.
I like that, sir.
Mr. McMore, I would recommend that you do this. I found that when we have detailed questions like that, the appropriate thing to do is to contact them and ask them if they would come and explain that to you.
Well, that's what I
You can
asked
have a
last time.
one-on-one.
I asked that the last time at the last meeting, so that's why I brought it up tonight.
It is not in this agenda package as is. I would recommend you call Mr. Skirvin and ask him the next time he's in the area, would he sit down and explain it to you? He said the other night he was very willing to give you all the salaries. He has no secrets.
Well, explaining it to me is fine, but I just assume these things be explained to the citizens. Because, I mean, I don't have any more sense than the rest of our citizens do. So if they,
I have
Okay,
a question.
Mr. Bly?
Say the council votes, you know, we do a yes vote on this, and then the road, is this gonna be a locked in once we agree to do it? If we see,
No, sir.
have you got a timetable that you got to stay in it?
Well, in terms of the plan, but that's got nothing to do with funding and the city's share of this. I just want to be real clear. The city is only paying just a very few $1,000s. We're getting a very cost-effective return on our investment for the number of riders in a year. That's a year. Their total budget, your point may be well taken, but that again, I think would be an issue for their board of directors to deal with in terms of what they're investing in terms of upper management. Our cost effectiveness, I think, is a very good return when you look at the small amount that we're investing. And we're not asking you to increase that. This is just the plan that's prerequisite to doing any changes before we can go forward for meeting the citizen demand, which we anticipate may increase. Is that-
well, let me ask you, Mr. Martin.
Yes, sir.
Would they have an option of not providing those services to our city, considering the federal government and the state government funding them? Would they have an option of not servicing our area if we didn't spend that few $1,000s that you're talking about?
I don't think we would receive the services if we would be eligible for them if this board didn't authorize participation. Now, what the funding formula would be, that might be.
That wasn't quite my question. My question was, would they be able to leave us out, our citizens out of the program if we didn't fund
If we
it,
didn't participate in the program, yes.
despite the state supports it and the federal government
Because
supports it?
I'm not sure every community does participate in it. They may or may
Well,
not.
what is the criteria for
I think
participation?
some of the grant money they get to operate the program is for senior citizens, senior service, and that's the grant money that a majority of the riders that they are using that money for. But they do pick up non-seniors as well.
Okay,
So,
So they would
the
have-
question is a little yes and no.
yeah.
They would
Right.
serve the elderly
They-
and the ones that wanted by some of the funds.
That's
The
why
other-
they're getting the
other
grants.
programs,
But,
the
yeah,
other
but, yeah, the other program.
That's why the government's
different.
giving them the grant to service our seniors, right? So they'd have to resurface us regardless of whether we contributed from the city budget or not.
If they were eligible, yes.
Yes, thank you.
Just for the seniors, yeah.
Right.
Right.
Good point.
Just,
But it,
Question.
but it's not 100% from the state. And that's why we have to participate in it
But
at
if
a
you-
certain,
And I believe that's what it's all about,
Yes.
is that at some point in time, if, there'll be an investment,
Right.
on more ridership and to make it
right,
better.
that's right.
So,
just as a point of clarification, as far as the salaries go, and especially those here in Franklin, we have nothing to do, well, salaries across the board, we have nothing to do with how they pay their employees, just as they don't have anything to do with how Franklin pays.
I think my point is getting lost in the fact that any investment that we make into any entity now needs to be taken into consideration in the financial tight we're in. So therefore, if the federal government and the state government are granting the funds through grants to provide these services, then I think that anything extra we spend is basically we just choosing to spend it if to get the grants they're required to provide the service. And that's the clarity that I wanted. And I think Mr. Goodwin answered that yes, that's how they get that's why they give them the grants, so they can give a service to our senior citizens and the people who are eligible.
May I have a motion to
Mr.
adopt? the
Mayor,
rec-
I just, my biggest concern, I don't have a problem with the plan. You gotta have a plan to get started, but my biggest concern is gonna be the long-term viability and the sustainability of the program, whether we can afford it going down the road. I think a lot of federal and state programs are gonna start having a more watchful eye on them just because of the limited funds at the state and federal level. And so it's gonna be pushed more, it's more of it being pushed down to us. I think we should move forward with the plan, but I'm just concerned that the long term, that it's just not gonna be a viable, sustainable program going forward. But I think we gotta have the plan just to get to that stage.
Right, it may very well not be, but that's what he said he would bring back to us, is more projected, or closer projection of cost, et cetera, when it comes time. But as you say, right now, and as I said earlier, it doesn't cost anything at this point to put it on the planning table. And that's all he's asking for tonight. He's not asking to know how much each person gets paid or how much it's gonna cost us 3 years from now. And We'll for us have to vote control, on that. We'll have control over it when it's a budget
That's
issue.
right.
That is correct. We either fund it or, right.
Right.
Okay, may I have a motion to adopt the plan?
So moved?
Motions are second.
Second,
I think we've had plenty of discussion. All in favor, say aye.
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 Nay.
Aye.
aye.
And aye. Motion carries. Thank you. The next item on our agenda is the Chowan River Basin Flood Task Force, and our guest tonight is Mark Mansfield from the Corps of Engineers.
Mr. Mayor, honorable members of council, and Mr. Martin, here to give you an update on a matter of extreme importance to the city of Franklin, and yes, in the entire Chowan River Basin. Most of you who live here, grew up here, work here, and raise families here can certainly remember the flooding events we've had in Franklin through the years. I do want to indicate to you that flooding is an issue in the Hampton Roads and western Tidewater area. And in fact, flooding here in the Franklin area is pervasive and has occurred in 1998, 1999, 2003, 2006, 2009, and yes, again in 2011. And in fact, 7 of the top 11 high water marks since recorded history have occurred since 1998 forward. So flooding has been an issue here and continues to be an issue here. And several years ago, 7 communities, including the city of Franklin, asked the Corps of Engineers to take the lead in developing some recommendations with respect to non-structural early warning systems for the basin. And so in partnership with the city of Franklin, the city of Emporia, Greensville County, Isle of Wight County, Southampton County, Surrey County, and Sussex County, the Corps of Engineers prepared a technical report which recommended stream and rainfall gauges be added to the forecasting network here in the Chowan River Basin. Other team members that were part of that advisory committee included the Virginia Department of Emergency Management, the Virginia Department of Environmental Quality, the Virginia Department of Game and Inland Fisheries, the Virginia Department of Forestry, the National Weather Service, the United States Geological Survey, and yes, the Federal Emergency Management Agency. The recommendations that you see on the fact sheet, I believe that has been handed out to you, represent about 2 years now of negotiations with federal and state partners to get us to a point where we're at tonight. Mayor Council has led a yeoman's effort in working with the Commonwealth of Virginia and with 2 federal agencies to actually begin putting funding in line for this important initiative. The stream gauge component of the initiative will be funded by the United States Geological Survey under a program match fund that they have, which is a 50-50 cost share. Commonwealth of Virginia will provide half of the cost to install the gauges, and the United States Geological Survey will provide the remainder. So there will be no cost to the city of Franklin or any of the other cities and counties for the installation. However, the maintenance of the gauges would be a requirement that is cost shared 50% with the localities and would be cost shared 50% with the USGS. So what I have been asked to do is provide you with an update, and I think, Mayor, the cost for that roughly is about $7,000 per each of the 7 localities on an annual basis. And that would provide stream gauges and then would also provide the lead-in for rainfall gauges in the community, and you can see the locations that are identified here on the fact sheet. But I'm here tonight to indicate that the governor's office will provide their share of the funding on or about June 20, and we're asking for the 7 localities to make an expression of interest in partnering on the annual maintenance of the system. So the cost again for that will be about $7,000 per year per locality. And I stand by to answer any questions that you may have. Yes, ma'am.
Are we in possession of gauges now? Do we have?
We have some gauges, but we don't have an entire network throughout the system. The idea would be here is that we would install rainfall and stream gauges upstream to better help predict when flooding will occur in Franklin and exactly how high that it will get. The gauges we currently have are located very close to Franklin, one here at the New Bridge and I believe one at Burdett, if I'm not mistaken. So what these tools will help do is better forecast when the flooding will get here and then how long it will last once it does get here.
Now, are we currently paying to maintain those gauges?
No. The program that USGS administers from a network perspective does require cost sharing. I'm not sure, I might have misspoken. I'm not sure if Franklin is paying currently for the USGS new gauge. I'm not certain of that. Someone on staff would have to answer that. It's not an agreement that the Corps is part of, but I can speak with respect to what we would be doing with the USGS for the new system.
And the new gauges and the gauges we currently have will all be integrated together?
Yes, sir. The term we use is synchronized. In other words, the information that is collected will be real-time and will be provided to decision makers, including the emergency management organizations throughout the region. And will provide information not only on rainfall, but the relative water levels and the durations associated. Yes, sir.
Mark, go back and give a history of what was predicted and what was actual at the last big floods to kind of paint the picture of why better forecasting is helpful.
Yes, thank you for the question. If you'll refer to the back side of your handout, the one that has the 2 hydrographs on it, the side-by-side hydrographs, that represents in 2006, the flooding that we had in 2006, that represents the forecast and the actual flooding that were experienced here in Franklin. And just to give you the numbers that are associated with it, the forecast for, and here's 2 technical terms that we traditionally use in the business. One is duration. That means the amount of time that the flood lasted. The original forecast was for a certain elevation and a certain duration. The duration actually ended up being about 290% longer than originally forecast. In other words, flooding was forecast to last about 2.5 days. It actually ended up being about 7 days. So it lasted longer than was forecast. And then the amplitude or elevation of the flooding was about 67% higher than had been forecast. So it was forecast to be 13.8 feet flooding levels, and the actual elevation ended up being about 22.9 feet. So from the 2006 flooding, the duration and amplitude were off an order of magnitude between 67% and 290. And when you have that kind of differences in forecasts, it tells me that we need some more effective tools to help manage flooding in the basin. So what do you get out of this? I know in public agencies today, we're all struggling with what's the benefit, what's the payoff for the expenditure. In the case here, the benefits would be that citizens and businesses can be evacuated more quickly, and that property decisions can be made such that contents can be rearranged before floodwaters become an issue. Can't do a whole lot with your inventory once it gets flooded. So the two major things that this would provide was, or will provide, is an early warning system that could evacuate in a more time-sensitive way, and also to help folks manage their valuables, property, and inventory prior to when floodwaters come.
I have a few questions.
Yes, sir.
First is, how many gauges are you talking about adding to what we have?
Would be 5 gauges, one in South Hill, one in Purdy, one in Delaware, one in Winton, and one in Branchville.
Okay, I should have been more specific. How many would be added to our area?
We look at it as a system. In other words, you're going to benefit from the rainfall gauges and stream gauges upstream in Franklin, even though you have a gauge at the bridge here.
So, just normal, talk to me like I'm a 2-year-old. So we wouldn't be adding any more gauges here?
We would not be adding any gauges in the city of Franklin.
Okay, and we currently have 2 gauges here in Franklin?
Have one in Burdette and one at the new bridge here crossing over to IP.
So we will be sharing a $7,000 a year maintenance fee on the gauges that are not in Franklin. They are part of the network.
You can say that, but as part of the network, there's also rainfall gauges that we will be talking about with the Weather Service, and they directly will benefit the city of Franklin in that we know what rainfall events are upstream that are going to be coming downstream. So you benefit from it because it's a network.
I'm sure. Tell me, have we had any testing or something to say that these gauges would be more reliable under those circumstances than the previous predictions?
Yes,
because the predictions, as you admit, they said it was going to last a couple of days, it lasted 7 days. They said it's going to be 14 feet, it was 22 feet. So that wasn't very accurate.
Right.
So what evidence do we have that these gauges would, provided we participated in this network, would assure us that we would have more accurate predictions?
More information is always better in terms of public policy decision-making. What we have found in other areas of the country, particularly here in Virginia and the Rappahannock River Basin, is that a more effective integrated system, we have gauges currently in the network, but they're not integrated. A lot of the information that comes out of them comes out on paper copies. They're not available till a day or two after the flooding event. There's a multitude of reasons that the data that we get isn't as useful as it could be if it were networked and data was provided real time. And when I say real time, you're talking about a 10-minute interval between the reading on the gauge and when an emergency manager, for example, has access to utilize that data.
So, but then there's also potential of false alarms too, isn't it?
I think it does the reverse. I think it provides better planning up front rather than get somebody worried downstream before they need to be engaged.
I don't know, I'm just feeling like the gauge says it's up there and somewhere else, and the gauge water goes high, and we send out this emergency alert, everybody starts packing up, moving their stuff, and then the flood doesn't even come to Franklin. You know, false alarm.
Well, I think the case here is the reverse. they were forecasting a short duration and a lower elevation, and it ended up being a longer duration and a higher elevation. So I would argue that more effective planning helps you downstream when your neighbors are already being flooded upstream. So I think the tools are better used for you in the lower part of the basin than they are in the upper part. They're getting flooded first.
But because they're getting flooded doesn't mean we're gonna get flooded. Or does it?
Yeah, it
In
does.
this basin, yes.
It does in this basin.
I think you have to understand what the basin is.
Yeah.
And the basin is a collection of water all the way from South Park Mall in Petersburg, all the way over to Blackstone and even down to Emporia.
Correct.
And it all funnels into these three rivers that end up coming through the city of Franklin
Right.
and from Cortland. So it's all coming upstream. So what
It's
you're
kind of
saying-
like an hourglass, if you will. You have a lot of water in the top part. You have a constriction, which in this case we would call Franklin, and then the water tends to get more dispersed as it gets down into the Albemarle and Pamlico Sound. So we're dealing with the hourglass effect here. If they get flooding upstream, you're going to get flooding here.
So when we got when we had Floyd here, that devastated us so bad, it devastated the other people up downstream or upstream is just as bad.
They had a lot of flooding downstream.
But same levels that kind of like we had, because we get, like you said, we get more because we're the little hourglass.
Right. The same amount of water has to pass through a constriction, which is this part of the river basin, and we tend to get that backup of waters. And then downstream, they got flooding too, but I would say the worst part of the flooding was actually in this general area.
Right. And I just don't understand. It seemed like to me then we would have more of the, since we're the small part of the hourglass, we would have more of the gauges here so that we could let the people upstream or downstream know that this water is coming. But
You
it
don't know
seems,
what water's coming unless you measure it upstream where the water's falling. It falls there
Okay.
and collects and comes down.
That's the rainfall
Yeah.
component of
What
it.
it boils down to, if you have all the gauges here, you won't get a true reading. But we do on flood, storms and all that, that thing comes from up north.
Yes, sir.
Then it filters in here to look, and that's why we have all this flooding.
Not
But
only that,
if,
but by
if
the
I
time
could
you get
comment, the key issue here is advance warning. That's what this is all about. If you do it here, it's too late.
Right.
You're measuring the height of what it achieves, which might be useful to somebody, but it's not giving them advance warning. The further upstream, this has been, as done, I'm familiar with it in at least one other state, and it is very important because it's much more accurate, and you're getting it hours in advance, which would allow someone the opportunity to take evasive action if that's available to them. So to put them here would not be advantageous to Franklin. It
I
might help
agree.
downstream, but upstream would be very advantageous to us. Probably we're the most important beneficiary to that information.
I understand the theory. I'm fully abreast of the theory. My concern is the accuracy of its predictions in regards to our annual cost for its, for it. If it's definitely going to keep us and provide our citizens with early warning of a
That's-
flood, and we're paying $7,000 a year, that's great.
That
That's
is.
cheap.
That
That's
is.
cheap to pay.
That's the way I see it.
But
Mr. Mayor.
if it's ineffective, then I think it's
Right, but if
Mr.
you
Mayor.
have one or two,
Go ahead.
Benny?
no, go ahead.
There are a couple questions that I have.
Yes, sir.
You said that we noticed, I've been kind of intrigued by this, that we noticed flooding in 1998 is when we really, what happened in 1998 that all of a sudden we started getting flooding here, where for 40 years before that we didn't?
There's a number of theories. We have not studied, per se, the basin. There are theories about land use, about logging practices, about debris that's gotten into the rivers. There's a multitude of things, and I would bet you that even Mother Nature has changed somewhat. The precipitation patterns have changed an awful lot in northeastern North Carolina and in Virginia.
Okay. The second thing is, just a comment that I'm aware of, that we have a business that's looking to relocate into Franklin, and they will not relocate into Franklin because of the flooding. But if we, and it's probably too late for that business, but if we could assure them that we were on top of it and could help them, that might change. For that business, it's probably out of the question, but future businesses, being able to tell them, and as a business owner downtown, believe me, when it starts raining more than about an inch, I start watching this little chart that y'all see on that paper, And our good deputy chief back there in the back starts getting phone calls from me about where it's gonna go. So I think it's really important that we do this.
And what would help you is knowing what's happening upstream to
That's
know
right.
what's coming this way.
That's right. And you can tell if the chart's online, because all of a sudden you see the dark line starting to leave the dotted line. You can tell the dotted line is not gonna hold true. And it doesn't take you long to see that. And I think if we had more upstream capability, you would pull those together so you could have confidence in what you're doing.
I would give you one more analogy, and I guess maybe to the Honorable Mr. McLemore, is that you can kind of think of flooding in this basin almost like a bathtub. It takes a while for the water to build up, but it takes an awful lot of time for it to go down the drain. It takes forever. We have flooding here, not like in the mountains where they have flash flooding and it's over in a couple of hours. We tend to get it for days and days and days, and it's a different dynamic.
I agree. I'm all for flood prevention. I can't understand why we don't have a flood reacting, some program to react when the flood is going to come. We can't stop it. The gauge can tell us it's coming,
Yes, sir.
but we need to have something in place to address it when it comes. So I'm all for flood prevention, and I want to see us implement a flood prevention plan or a flood response plan.
Yes, sir.
And I think
Any
this is
questions?
probably the first step of that.
Yeah.
Mr.
Correct.
Austin?
How often do the gauges need updating, and who assumes that financial responsibility?
Every 2 years, the gauges are relooked at in terms of technology, but you'll sign an agreement, I think it's for a 2-year period, with the United States Geological Survey. They're the agency that provides the cost share match, but they relook at it about every 2 years,
And they do the maintenance.
and they provide the match.
They do the updating too.
Yes.
We do the maintenance.
No,
and
well, we pay for it, but they.
They do the work.
Well,
physically.
I'm asking,
Yes, ma'am.
who assumes financial
The cost.
responsibility for the updating?
Well, it's a cost share 50/50, but your 50% will go with USGS dollars for them to keep the system maintained. They will keep the system
They
maintained.
put in half, and the 7 localities put in half.
$7,000 a year to
And we only
us.
get 2 years' notice to prepare for that? Is that what?
No, we sign a 2-year contract going
Right.
forward,
Right.
and then we renew at the end of that 2 years. They'll come and, I assume, give us a projection of what the cost will be going forward.
Yeah, they'll tell you if the 7,000 needs to be adjusted by, normal operating increases, but you would know for a 2-year period what your costs are.
So when we say maintenance, we're talking about updating as well, included in that?
Yes,
Okay.
correct. That's the total cost, everything
Okay.
considered. Yes, ma'am.
New gauge or whatever.
And for them operating, they go out and check them, and they have to replace them. We were talking about that earlier today.
Yeah, it could be a matter as simple as somebody out hunting in a boat and deciding they want to take target practice at a gauge that, there's nobody around and it happens to be something to shoot at. It does happen.
And if that were the scenario to happen, how would they know it to be able to correct it before that water came?
It would stop transmitting.
It would stop transmitting and you'd get a blip and there's no data.
They go out and check.
Basically, 15 minutes after it happened, that's when you know, because the data would stop transmitting. And then the sensor would tell USGS, we need to send somebody out, the latitude, longitude, coordinate, such and such. There's a problem of some sort. They go out, they look at it. Okay, something's happened, it needs to be replaced, and they replace it.
And to give you more assurance on the reliability, this is similar technology to what we already use in our own utility system that our folks could comment on, that is very reliable. It's technology that's been around for a good while. It tells us the level of our tanks. We call it SCADA system. Our guys can comment on that further, but this is very reliable technology. Nothing's infallible. It's made by man, but it is very reliable.
Okay, thank you very much.
Any other questions?
I have a question for Mark.
Yes, please.
Deputy Chief Carr. Are we presently maintaining the gauges now that are at Burdick and here?
No, ma'am, we do not pay for the burden gauge, but we do pay the maintenance fee, and I believe it's the same amount as we're talking about here for the one at the River Bridge.
Okay.
That's my understanding.
The one at the River Bridge you're talking about here going over into Isle of Wight?
Yes, sir.
Do we share any, does Isle of Wight share any of that cost with us?
No.
No, sir, that was done through the city emergency management. A grant was placed to put that gauge in, and that was part of the process of this maintenance fee, just as Mark is asking now for the other gauges. We incorporate that into our budget.
Will the current gauges come underneath this maintenance agreement, or are they going to be kept separate?
For now, separate, but we're going to use the same type of agreement.
Okay, but it's going
But
to
they
be
will be
separate
separated,
agreements.
yes, sir.
So that will be like 14,000 a year for us for the two.
I really don't know that much about the gauges that the city has already undertaken with USGS. I don't know the financial.
So
arrangements.
our gauges wouldn't just be incorporated into the network?
Just the information.
The information from the new gauges and the gauges will be incorporated into the network that I'm referring to. I don't really know how the gauge that's over here now is networked. We weren't involved in that.
So they wouldn't, you don't know that they'd be adding our gauge, calling it our gauge, the one over here, adding our gauge to the network?
Yeah, I don't know.
You
I
talking
would
about- you talking
assume so, and we'd be
informationally?
happy to follow up on that.
Informationally,
It's going to be connected.
I would think it would be informationally, and if it's, that gauge of ours is of help to those other areas as well, isn't it?
Yes,
It
it
really
is.
isn't, because it's downstream.
I'll take
And
that
it's
for
under
action,
separate deal.
provide you
yes, you
follow
say-
up.
He said yes, you say no.
Well, it
No.
would be downstream of here.
Well, yeah.
so-
It'd be helpful to people in Carolina.
Yeah, a gauge in Franklin is a benefit to Franklin, and it's also a benefit to folks living downstream. A
I
gauge
agree.
upstream of Franklin is a benefit to the folks that live upstream as well as to Franklin. So I'll be glad to check for you and find out if, my guess is, my professional opinion is, that the gauge would be the existing gauge would be added to the network.
And I would love it if, once it's added to the network, then, and since it protects both places, upstream and downstream, then it would be covered under the same $7,000 a year maintenance fee.
I
Instead
can't
of,
speak to that, but I do think it should be part of the network. The financial piece, I don't know.
Mr. Mayor, I would concur. It seemed like to me, we're carrying full boat on one gauge, but we're sharing 1/7 with all the other gauges. And if everybody's in the network, everybody should share in all the gauges. I don't know what our grant requirements are and all that, but at some point in time, I would think that everybody should share in all the gauges if we're gonna share.
And I would certainly think that would be something we would look at as a whole group with these gauges, is lumping them together in the maintenance, the upkeep program. But when that gauge was put in, we requested a grant just to put that gauge in to give us some type of monitoring of the river, to give us some information that we could prepare the downtown businesses and the citizens of Franklin for some preparation in case of flood. We were utilizing the numbers we were getting from this gauge from the Burdette scale, and it was quite a difference between the numbers, so we had to develop with Donald's assistance, with elevations, the plateau, when Burdette scale said 17 foot, we have to equate that to what this gauge is gonna say, and where it's gonna be in Franklin. I think with the complex of all of these gauges working together and hook that information together will give us a better opportunity, will give us more information and a much longer warning process of we potentially could have a flooding event in Franklin. As Mr. Mansfield stated, you know, upstream gauges is what we need the information on to predict what's gonna happen here. This gauge is kind of after the fact. The flooding is here before this gauge is gonna register that. Gauges upriver will give us a gauge to say how long of duration before it recedes.
Thank you.
Any other questions? May I have a motion to authorize the participation in a regional contract to support the operations and maintenance with this gauging program as provided by the USGS service and the state of Virginia? We just got notification this past week from the Secretary of Natural Resources that the state of Virginia has committed to the city of Franklin and the region the $80,000, and they'll be sending us that check by the 20th of June.
Mr. Mayor, is that check gonna, supposed to cover part of this fee that we're,
No, that is strictly the purchase of and installation of this 5 gauges. It's $160,000 for that. The USGS provides 80,000, and non-federal funds has to be used for the other half.
so the state is
Instead of
providing?
going to the
State's
7
providing.
municipalities,
The
we've
state
been
is,
negotiating with the governor's office for 3 years, starting in 2008. And it was only this past spring, a month ago, that they finally agreed to find the money and allocate it for this project.
so the state is gonna give us the
That is
80,000
correct.
Correct,
to go along with the geological match?
Yes,
correct.
Okay.
So you'll pay $0 for the
For the
acquisition and
gauges.
implementation.
We're paying for the maintenance fees.
You're paying half of the
Now,
maintenance.
this is my last question. Do I think that it is worth knowing if our gauge will be, our gauge, who we are paying maintenance for alone, would be included in that maintenance fee? I think that's a question worth getting an answer for.
Well, I
We
think
will,
that's
we'll
something we can
investigate
work
that.
toward, but it's a separate contract. It's a separate contract for that 1 gauge for the city of Franklin. This is a separate contract of 5 gauges with 7
I
municipalities.
understand that. So
There's no
how much
reason that we
is our
can't try
gauge
to merge
maintenance?
it.
How much is our gauge costing us?
Sir?
How much is our gauge costing us, the separate one?
I would be afraid to say in the man without looking at our budget, but I believe it's somewhere around $2,000.
We'll see.
Okay.
We'll raise that issue and get an answer, and we will investigate the potential for the future, maybe.
Merging it.
And the only reason I ask that is, I mean, if this is something that, when would this program be implemented if we approve this?
It is in the USGS budget to now. They have money.
So if we approve this tonight, when will we start, if a big storm comes, when would we be able to say it's in place?
I think they'd be able to start work on it this summer.
That's if all the partners do agree.
Are we the first to
Yes.
we're the first?
Yeah, there's gonna be meetings with each of the other boards.
So the other boards haven't approved it yet.
No, it starts
They
here,
haven't
and then,
gotten the information yet.
Is there a reason why it starts here?
well, we
Yes,
just got it.
because we
Friday.
just got the information last week.
Okay,
And
so
this is
then,
the first board to meet. Sussex was supposed
Oh,
to be here
okay.
tonight, and they were not able to. They're tied up in a meeting and couldn't get here.
so would it be harmful to us or to our budget if we were to wait and see how the other entities are going to do before we commit to the
Well, it's a
agreement?
no-go deal unless we all do it, unless we come back.
It's gotta
and
be
say-
100% or it
Right.
comes back.
So
Or
we
it
need,
comes
but
back.
we have to be first then, okay.
Well,
I
just-
think it's a
Somebody
small
gotta be
amount to pay to protect the businesses downtown personally.
And
I'd
I
like
think
to
it's a
make a
great
motion
step
to-
if we set the stage for them, then they'll follow. So
I move for approval of the gauges, participation in the program to put the gauges on the river. It's gonna be a tight budgeted year, but I think this is something we gotta do to protect the citizens and the businesses.
I second that motion.
Motion is second on, Ms.
Question.
Johnson.
The $7,000 starts with the next fiscal budget, correct?
We've identified funding in the current year's budget. We don't know that answer yet, or if it's required to be done before the end of the year. We can, Mark and I have talked about it today, and Melissa and I, we believe we can cover it in this year's budget with some unused funds,
I'm not sure we
if
have the answer
necessary.
for you as to what year it starts.
You can't maintain something that hadn't even been in.
Really?
So,
Really? Thank you.
Yeah, I don't think we'll need maintenance money out of your current budget.
yeah.
Okay, but we didn't know if they would require us to put the money in a pot before they
Prepaid.
let us
I
do it.
think the only thing that
before
it
they'll build
requires is a signed contract with all 7 agents.
Yeah, because sometimes on these, sometimes you have to put your money in though before they'll build it, because that's half of the project. is building.
Sometime,
Some,
not all the time.
that's right.
See, my thing is, we always entering into contracts, making promises what we're gonna do. And I just don't feel comfortable, and I'm gonna support this, but I don't feel comfortable why we have to be the first ones on the train when we having such financial problems. And somebody else
Well, who's
in,
gonna be first?
I don't know, they will discuss it, other boards will discuss it. Maybe somebody will come up with something that we didn't, that will find a reason that we need to, for lack of another word, perfect it or whatever. But for us to just jump on first when we still have questions that we obviously have, such as, is it coming out of this budget or next budget?
That's
Yeah,
coming
we
out of
get-
this budget.
I know,
Would
you see,
would it be better if we were second?
it might, with me, I'd be happy if we were number 5.
I think the mayor answered that by saying it's all or none,
Yeah, it's all or none.
so.
We're only agreeing to 1/7 of the cost. If it's anything other than that, will require another consideration by this council.
Yeah, and if somebody's a no-go, or if somebody comes up with a better idea, or a.
We'll be too late
It'll be
because
the
we,
first-
because we're already in a 2-year
No, it won't be
contract.
too late. The deal will be a new deal.
We'll already be in a contract for 2 years.
No,
We're
there's no
not signing a
contract till all
contract until we
7
get all
approve.
in.
All 7 have to sign it to be a contract.
What is asking of us tonight?
Ma'am?
What is asking of us tonight to enter into?
Into an
Authorized.
operation and maintenance agreement to
Yeah.
support it's actually $6,915 is what it is. 1/7 of the $48,400.
Okay, well, it's gonna be a date in there, it's in the contract, in the agreement, to, a date to start.
Yes, ma'am, I believe they will have a date.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, you're
I'm kinda
authorizing,
like Mr. McNamara,
well, you're authorizing the
Ring a bell.
contract,
Thank you.
but we're not gonna execute it until all parties have agreed. You're only authorizing it so that we can execute it once all parties agree.
See, the thing about that is, that's a selling tool. When you go to these other counties, you can say, well, Franklin's on board with it already. You know, when everybody on Franklin wasn't really ready to just jump right on board. So I'm just leery of why we have to, for instance, like we were the last ones to do the stickers. We the first ones to go signing contracts.
Well, I
We
think-
signed 20-year contracts, now it's 2-year contract, we just contract.
My, one comment I would
second
make
move on
is it's to the city's advantage more than probably anybody else to be first in this one. I hope the other 6 agree, because if they don't, we lose, and we're the big loser in the group.
Okay. I have a motion and a second on the floor. All in favor of the motion, say aye.
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 And aye. Motion carries. Thank you, Mark. Appreciate it.
One last thing, I guess you'll be getting a copy of an agreement that will be provided by USGS that will spell out particulars, but you'll have to execute that along with each of the other localities in order for this to vest. I'll use that term. In order for the agreement to vest, all parties would have to agree to it.
Thank you very much.
Yep.
Mr. Mayor, if I could just follow up on
Yes,
his
please.
comment, could the city manager make sure that we get copies of that agreement once, because there were a lot of questions, we'd
Yes.
like to see what's in it.
Once it's finalized, then you will receive a copy.
But there will
It should be very similar to the one that we cost shared on the study that was done, as well as it'll look very much like the one that the city of Franklin engages with to the maintenance of this particular one. There'll be some kind of a combination of those, but
If-
you'll get a copy.
Excuse me, Mr. Mayor, if in the event we should notice something that is of concern to us in that contract, will we have to have a vote to change our mind or whatever, or was that the vote we just made? We're in it, we just want to see it, but we're in it. I don't understand.
Well, my intent of seeing the contract was so I could read it, and if there is a particular provision that we would have time to get with whoever's negotiating to go back and say, hey, this is a concern. And whether it's a deal killer or not depends on how big of a point it is. If they say it's gonna be $7,000 for 2 years, and then we're gonna assume full responsibility for $100,000 a year, it's a deal killer.
Yeah, but can we kill it then once we voted, or will we have to bring it back for another
We haven't
vote?
signed the contract, we have not
I don't
committed.
think we're bound until we actually put the contract up for approval.
So what did we just vote on?
We've agreed to pursue the contract, to get it, and to agree to participate with 7 municipalities. And the contract will have to be brought back for approval, I would think.
I thought you authorized the contract.
That's what I thought
We authorize the contract, but we've gotta be able to see what what it
attorney
is.
hasn't said
That's
a
all
thing.
that.
Yeah, and if it deviates from the approved format that you've just discussed, then it will come back.
If it
Mr. Williams?
Motion to reconsider. It's that simple. If you get the contract, you don't like the contract, you have questions about the contract that aren't being answered, or if somebody else says, I'm not gonna sign the contract, you do a motion to reconsider. It's that simple,
At that time.
at that time.
Okay, very good. Thank you all. Mr. Martin, manager's report.
I have nothing further to add, but I'll be glad to answer any questions.
Okay. If not, may I have a motion to go into closed session?
So move.
I move that the Franklin City Council meet in closed session to consider appointments to boards and commissions, to discuss and consider the disposition of publicly held real property where the discussion in an open meeting would adversely affect the bargaining position or negotiating strategy of the city council, and to discuss the expansion of an existing business where no previous announcement has been made of the business interest in expanding its facilities in the community pursuant to Virginia Code Section 2.2-3711A 1, 3, and 5.
Motion, is there a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
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 And aye. Motion carries. Thank you all for coming.